Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I really appreciate you being with me. What we're going to do on the video for today is kind of summarize what we have been seeing in regard to the aspect of Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, in which Daniel was told 70 weeks are determined to finish the transgression. Now, I've spent a good bit of time sharing with you that to finish the transgression meant to finalize, to finish the prophetic office through the fulfillment of all prophecy. Now, I understand, I well recognize this is a highly controversial issue. But as we're going to see as we embark next week on the next aspect of Daniel chapter 9, that it's a perfect correlation, absolutely perfect correlation in what I presented to you and the additional thoughts that Daniel was being told about. In other words, finishing the transgression perfectly segues for us into the discussion of seal vision and prophecy. So that's coming up. You don't want to miss it. You want to be watching for it. And by the way, I want to thank you so very, very much for the fact that the viewership is growing slowly, but also the subscriber list is growing. I'm now up over 7,000 subscribers, and that is certainly not viral, as they express it these days. But I told someone just recently, I said, I've got 7,000 plus subscribers now. I never in my wildest dreams imagined or dreamed that I would have a congregation of over 7,000 people. That's great. That's absolutely fantastic. So I want to thank you for joining in, for tuning in, for studying along. And look, I appreciate so much the comments, even those of you who disagree. Now, let me say this again. I have said this countless times. I've just asked for people to have some respect, okay? When I post a video, if you want to comment, that's great. Confine your comments to the subject of the video. I actually had to remove about 3 different people who over a period of month after month after month after month would post comments that were absolutely totally critical, that had zero to do with the subject of the video. Their comments were obfuscatory, they were diversive, that is to say, they were trying to take attention away from the subject of the video. And they were trying, at the same time, to set forth and to present their own agenda. Well, that's not what my videos are for, folks. Okay, this is my blog. These are my videos, and the subjects are intended to help us all know the heart and the mind of God better. And the subjects are on given topics. So don't come onto my forum, okay, and post about subjects that are a part of your personal agenda and that have nothing to do with the subject of my videos. That's disrespectful. If I were to come on into someone's house, okay, or if someone comes in my house and they start to light up a stogie, and I say, excuse me, I don't allow smoking in my house. If they went ahead and lit up a stogie, a cigarette, a pipe, or whatever, wouldn't you consider that disrespectful? Well, of course you would. If I came into your house and you had a rule, no smoking, but I said, I don't care what your rule is, and I would light up a stogie, which I don't smoke at all, but nonetheless, in the illustration, if I just decided to light up a cigarette or cigar or whatever in your home, knowing that that's a violation of your house rules, that would be horribly disrespectful. And you'd probably ask me to leave. Okay? So I think you get the point. I hope that you will understand, and I hope that you will be respectful when I post videos. Post comments about the subject of the video. If you disagree with the video, that's fine. Express yourself respectfully, courteously, with Christian decorum, and we can discuss it. But don't go calling me names. Don't go calling me a heretic and I'm doomed to hell and all that kind of stuff like that. There's no place in Christian discussions on subjects that people disagree on. All right? If you disagree, that's fine. Just be courteous. Okay, enough of that. Thank you again for joining me on this morning's Morning Musings. So, over the last several weeks, I've shared with you the challenge of Christ. Been doing this for over 2 years now. The challenge of Christ was found in John chapter 10 and verse 37. If I do not do the works which the Father has given me, do not believe me. Do not believe me for my word's sake. Believe me for my works. In other words, it was not enough for Jesus to say, you know, guys, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be crucified, buried, and resurrected on the third day. Not enough to say it. If he didn't do it, then he failed his own challenge. I've had someone recently say, oh, Preston's taking that challenge completely out of context. Now, they haven't shown how I'm taking it out of context. They just rather acerbically say, oh, you're taking it completely out of context. No, I'm not. Paul said, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if Christ is not risen, in other words, if Jesus didn't keep his word, then your faith is in vain. We, the apostles, are found to be false witnesses. Paul understood the challenge of Christ, and the challenge of Christ in regard to his resurrection is the same identical kind of challenge that we find when he said he was going to come back in the first century on the clouds with the angels, with the shout, with the trumpet. Okay? If he didn't do it, then he failed. He's a liar. Or choose your option. So, what I've been sharing with you is, here is Jesus' predictions of his coming for the first century, or in the first century. The challenge of Christ is, did he do it? I understand fully what a challenge it is to change our paradigm and to say, okay, I no longer believe that Jesus predicted that he was going to come back as a literal physical man. And by the way, people are ridiculing me for saying as a 5'5" Jewish man. Well, guess what? According to historical, archaeological, anthropological studies of the first century, the average height of the average man was between 5'5" and 5'7". So I'm not being disrespectful of Jesus in any way whatsoever when I say he was a 5'5" Jewish man. He was a Jewish man, and unless you can show that he was, 6'3", whatever, then I'm not being disrespectful. I'm honoring history. Okay, enough of that. Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, what Jesus predicted is unequivocal. It's undeniable. He said he was coming back in the first century. He said over and over, the New Testament writers are very clear, the appointed time has come. Now look, folks, that's incredibly significant. Why? Well, because the Old Testament set the time for the coming of the Lord. The Old Testament set the time for the coming of the kingdom, the judgment, the resurrection, the new creation. The Old Testament prophets said that time had not arrived in their day. In the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 10, verse 4, verse 14, Daniel chapter 12, verse 9 through 11, Daniel was told that the vision that he was being given, which extended to the days of the Roman Empire, was not soon, it was not near, it was for many days off. It was a long time away. Consequently, Daniel was told, Daniel, seal up the vision of this book, because the time is not near. But it's for an appointed time. Greek word, kairos, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. So here we have the Old Testament prophets foretelling the last days, foretelling the time of the end, foretelling the last day, foretelling all of these eschatological tenets, being told it wasn't for their day, it wasn't for their time, wasn't for their generation. But the New Testament writers, and by the way, Jesus prior to them, said the appointed time for what the Old Testament prophets had foretold had arrived in the first century. Now look, folks, you've got to catch the power of this. Chief among them, I say chief, but certainly as a major element. See, we're putting to the test this idea of the first century being the appointed time. Okay? But in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, Daniel was told 70 weeks are determined to finish the transgression. So the 70 weeks is the appointed time. Got that? The 70 weeks is the appointed time to fill up the measure of sin. Okay. So what do we find? Well, we have found in the Old Testament, Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, that in the last days, Israel would fill up the measure of their sin. Now, it doesn't use that term, but it speaks of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Well, for the avenging of the blood of the martyrs to take place, guess what? The measure of suffering, the measure of the martyrs, had to be fulfilled, and the measure of sin on the part of the persecutors had to be filled up. So the term isn't used, but the concept of the idea, the motif, the theme is most assuredly found in Isaiah chapter 2 and following. Isaiah chapter 65. In Israel's last days, God said, your sins and the sins of your fathers will a measure into your bosom. That's filling up the measure of sin. Then we come to the New Testament, and as I've already suggested, over and over again, what do we find? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 13, 7 and following, many prophets and wise men have desired to see the things which you, that's his apostles, have desired to see and to look into, and have not seen them. The things which the angels have desired to look into. He said, you are seeing them. Do you see the contrast? And throughout Jesus' parabolic teaching, he spoke of Israel filling up the measure of their sin. Now remember, Daniel's talking about 70 weeks are determined on your people and on your holy city to finish the transgression. So it's all about Israel. And now here in the New Testament, Jesus is talking about his generation filling up the measure of their sin, and that would be accomplished by killing him. They'd already killed the prophets, but they would kill him, and they would kill his apostles and prophets that he sent to them. Matthew chapter 21, Matthew chapter 22. I mean, folks, this message of what the Old Testament prophets said about the appointed time and the finishing of the transgression, i.e. the filling up of the measure of the sin, permeates the New Testament. We have come to the book of Revelation, and what do we find in the book of Revelation? John said he saw the opening of the fifth seal, and there he saw under the altar The souls of those who had been beheaded for the word of God, slain for the word of God, and for the testimony which they held. And they cried out and said, How long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not avenge us on those who dwell upon the earth? And they were given white robes and told to rest for a little while, until their fellow brethren who should be slain as they were should be filled up. What did Daniel 9 predict? The filling up of the measure of sin, which is temporally equivalent to the filling up of the measure of suffering. Okay? Synchronous events. So here we are told that the saints cried out for vindication on those who dwelt on the earth, those who had slain them, and they were told to rest for only a little while. Now here we are, 2,000 years removed from the book of Revelation, and we're told Revelation is not fulfilled yet. And yet, what did Jesus say about the time of the filling up of the measure of sin, of suffering? Well, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 23, speaking to the Jews standing in the temple, Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Behold, I send to you prophets, wise men, scribes. Some of them you shall scourge and crucify and chase from city to city, that upon you may come all of the blood of all of the righteous shed on the earth, from righteous Abel unto Zachariah, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all of these things, all of what things? All of the blood of all the righteous will come upon this generation. I got to share with you, I don't mean to be unkind here at all, but I had someone tell me just this morning that Jesus' reference to this generation is a reference to the 2,000 years since Jesus uttered those words and our present day. He said this generation means this age. Well, you're not going to find a translation to render it that way. You're not going to find any credible commentary that renders it that way. When I pointed out that the lexicons do not support that, he said, well, I don't know about the lexicons, but I just know what I know. Ladies and gentlemen, this is argumentum ad desperatum exemplified, manifested, blown up. And again, not to be unkind, but this is utterly ridiculous. This is imposing a preconceived idea of the nature of the coming of the Lord, judgment, resurrection onto the ancient text and say, well, I know what this generation means normally, but it can't mean that because my concept hasn't come true. That's not the way we do biblical hermeneutic. It's just not the proper way. Okay, I got to hurry here. So once again, we come to the book of Revelation, and Revelation basically tells us from the very beginning that it's about the time of the vindication of the martyrs, which means it's the time of the filling up of the measure of suffering and sin. Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following. The time has come for what? This is under the sounding of the seventh trumpet, which is the last trumpet of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is the fulfillment of all things. Okay? And at the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the mystery of God foretold by the prophets, Revelation chapter 10, 6 and following, would be completed, would be filled up, would be finished. It's the fulfillment of all prophecy. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that the resurrection is the time of the fulfillment of all prophecy? Well, I suspect you do. Sure you do. Everybody does. Okay? So in the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the angels of heaven say, the time has come, O Lord. You have taken your power and have begun to reign. Now this is speaking of the Father. The time of your wrath has come. Well, what is God's wrath all about? Oh, the avenging of the martyrs. Revelation 16. Revelation chapter 6, 12 to 17. The time of your wrath has come. The time of the dead that they should be judged. The time for the nations to be angry. And the time for the rewarding of your servants, the prophets. So what is this? This is resurrection. Sounding of the seventh trumpet. The time is coming. Come. Well, what does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? The time of the dead that they should be judged. These are the martyrs. The time of the prophets that they should be rewarded. Well, who are the prophets? Well, at least two of them are mentioned in Revelation chapter 11. The two witnesses, the two prophets, they prophesy day and night for 3.5 years. Times and a half time, 42 months. You see? This is the vindication of the martyrs, which means it's the fulfillment of Revelation chapter 6. The time of the martyrs has come. Time of the martyrs to be fulfilled or vindicated has come in Revelation chapter 11. That means, guess what? The measure of sin, the finishing of the transgression had arrived. Okay, when would that be? Oh, it would be at the judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. It is the city that spiritually was called Sodom and Egypt. Well, as I pointed out in last week's video, there is no other city in all of the Bible ever spiritually designated as Sodom except Old Covenant Jerusalem. Folks, how are you going to change that? Former preterist Sam Frost says, when asked in a recent debate with William Bell asked him, who is Babylon? Who is Babylon? Sam Frost said, well, it's any city and every city. No, it's not. That's one of the most ridiculous arguments I've ever heard in my life. I'm sorry. It's just utterly ridiculous. That means that any city and every city is the city that killed the prophets. Any city and every city is where the Lord was crucified. Any city and every city is the city that killed Jesus' apostles and prophets. And yet Jesus was emphatic. Luke chapter 11, 49 following, Luke chapter 13, 28 and following, it was Jerusalem to whom he would send his apostles and prophets. It is Jerusalem that would kill his apostles and prophets. Jesus never, ever, ever accused Rome. And you know what? He never accused America of killing him or his apostles and prophets. Jesus never ever said or indicated or hinted that any city at all and all cities could ever be identified as the cities, plural, when it's singular, that filled up the measure of their sin by doing what? Killing the Old Testament prophets. Folks, no other city ever did that other than Jerusalem. But that's repetitious. Go back and watch last week's program. So then we come, finally, to Revelation chapter 17. Revelation chapter 17, this great city, this harlot city, and I've got to make this observation very quickly here. Do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, that the term harlot is used 91 times in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament? In all occurrences, with the exception 5, 6, maybe 7, with the exception of those very, very, very few examples, the word that is translated as harlot is used to describe not what you and I would think about when we think about prostitute, just a fallen woman. No. Harlot is used in the Old Testament, which is the background for Revelation. Harlot is used to speak of a wife who had broken the marital covenant. Is that significant or what? So, Revelation 17, 18, 19 is about the destruction, the coming destruction, the destruction that was coming very, very, very soon from when John wrote, not 2,000 years later. And we're told it's the destruction of this harlot city, Babylon. She was holding a cup full, fill up the measure, full of the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Christ. Folks, this is the fulfillment of Revelation chapter 6. How long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not avenge us on those who dwell on the earth? And they were given white robes and told to rest for a little while until their fellow brethren who should be slain as they were should be fulfilled. Revelation 17, here's the harlot, the city Babylon, which is where the Lord was crucified, holding a cup full of the blood of the martyrs. How can we miss this constant, this bloody red thread that runs from Revelation 6, actually Revelation 1, all the way through the book of Revelation, pointing to one city, the city where the Lord was crucified. Now, unless you can identify some other city as the city guilty of killing the Old Testament prophets, other than Jerusalem, and you can't, not in the Bible. Stephen, standing in the temple in Acts chapter 7, said, pointing the finger at that accusing audience, which of the prophets, that's Old Testament prophets, have you not slain? You can say that's hyperbole if you wish, but it's still the accusation that it was Jerusalem alone, guilty of killing the prophets. No other city other than Jerusalem is where the Lord was slain. No other city other than Jerusalem is the city guilty for the death of Jesus' apostles and prophets. So what does that mean? It means that the first century Old Covenant Jerusalem, full of the blood of the martyrs, was fulfilling Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. I'm completely out of time. See you next week.